Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of our API demo project. Today, we're going to be talking about database configuration. So first of all, I'm going to explain what an environment variable is inside of our bash terminal and how we can use it. Then we're going to create a connection string for our database that will choose the test database if we're in test mode, or the real database if we're not in test mode. Then I'm going to create a .m file to hide these database connection strings. And then I'm going to add the .m file to the getignore file that we have in our project. So let's get started. So an environment variable is a variable in bash that you can set, or that a program can set. And specifically, the node environment is it's something that's set up by Node itself in your terminal, and its default is development. So anytime that you're working on a project, you're running the files on your local machine, you are in development mode. The other common mode that you can be in is test. So this is something that's usually triggered by your test running library. So whether that's Mocha, whether that's Jest, or any of the other libraries, it's going to temporarily change your node environment variable to test in the background, so that it's using all of your test variables, and then it's going to revert to development as soon as it's done running your test suite. And then the final one that we're not going to be concerned with right now is production. And usually if Node is running somewhere on a server environment, it's going to automatically be set to production. And that's just going to give it different ways to optimize how the program is run. So the development mode for Node is really good for constantly, you're constantly changing and rerunning your code, and that is what it is optimized for. So if we go to our index.js file inside of our database folder, which is inside of our model folder, which is inside of our source folder, this, in the last episode, is where I was talking about installing pgpromise and how we need to instantiate the function with these parentheses right here. And I talked about exporting the function, exporting db, after we set it to pgpromise. So you notice that there's some new code set up here. The reason why I'm not live typing this is because I don't trust myself to be able to remember it and explain it. This is something I usually do once per project, and I don't honestly have it memorized. So first, I'm creating a variable called connection string. And this variable is going to be passed to the pgpromise call. And so when pgpromise runs, it's going to grab this connection string information, and it's going to connect to the database that way. And so this construction, if you haven't seen it before, is called a ternary statement. It's essentially a shorter, cleaner way of doing an if-else statement, but it's essentially doing almost exactly the same thing. People who are really good at ternaries, please don't pick me apart for that one. I know that there's some slight variations in how it works. But essentially, this is how a ternary works. So I'm saying I want to set the connection string to one of these options. If the node environment variable is test, I want to, so basically saying, like, if the statement is true, I want to set that variable to this variable. So I want connection string to be equal to the test database URL. If the environment is not test, so meaning that we're in the else part of the if-else block, I want the connection string to be equal to our regular database URL. So that's all that's doing. So whatever appears directly after this question mark is essentially like the if it's true, and whatever's appearing after the colon is if it's false, and the what referring to this line. So now let me explain what this funny little thing is. So I mentioned that this was something inside of bash, which is our terminal. So bash has a number of process.env statements. The node environment is one that automatically comes with node when you install it. And as I said, it's referring to this development, test, or production thing. So we're saying that if test is what's being sensed, like basically if we're running Mocha right now, we're going to be connecting to the database test URL. So why do we have process.env before these variables, and why aren't we importing these variables into this file? Hopefully you're asking yourself this question if you haven't seen this before, and that's a good instinct. Normally, whenever we have a variable that we haven't declared anywhere, you want to see it imported at the top, or sorry, required. Import is more modern syntax that you may see if you've worked with React. So these variables are actually being set in bash by a third-party program, and that program is called dotenv. So I believe that we installed this in one of our prior modules for this course. So dotenv is a package, and its sole purpose is to read this file called a .env file. The .env file should be at the root of your directory. That's where it knows where to look for it. And it's a very simple file. It's not a JavaScript file. All it does is set bash variables. So now you can see where our variables are coming from. So database URL is equal to a string, and database test URL is also equal to a string. No semicolons here, it's just the variable name equals and then the string. And let's talk about what these strings are. So both of these are addresses for our two different databases, one for our regular and one for our test. So the first part of this is just saying this is a Postgres database. And then it's saying it lives at localhost 5432. 5432 is a port on our machine. It's what Postgres automatically defaults to, so you can't just make up this number. It has to be 5432. And then the final part of it is the name of our database. So for the purposes of this episode, we're just going to call it API demo. For the purposes of the test one, we're just going to say API demo test. So simple enough. Just create that file. And then the final piece of it is we don't want to commit those variables to GitHub. So in our .gitignore file, also in the root of our project, you're going to put that .m file here on line 2. And so now when we commit the project, these variables aren't going to be committed. And the reason that you don't want to do this is it's going to be different on everybody's machine. And also you might not want to give away your database connection string. We're not using host name and password right here, but a lot of times your database connection string is going to contain those, and you don't want to be giving away your password. All right, so now that we have that set up, when this line is run, it's going to look for those variables and it's going to connect to them. And it's going to connect to the correct database based on what we've entered and based on what the environment variable is at the time. And then finally, we're passing that connection string to PGP so that anytime we make a call to database in another file, it's going to be running PGP. PGP is going to make a connection to the correct database, and we're going to have access right from our node. All right, let's just make sure that we've covered everything in here. All right, it looks like we have. So I will see you next episode.
What is that?